Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave from BONA, and just wanted to introduce myself. I've been with BONA for almost 18 years now, and prior to joining BONA, I installed and sanded and finished wood floors for over 20 years. And I actually started using BONA products in 1985. So a lot of what I like about this presentation is I feel that I'm just telling you or sharing with you some of the things that I used to do on behalf of my clients and customers. So it makes for an enjoyable presentation. Since many of you are here to get industry credits, either with AIA or IDCEC, today's content is going to maintain its neutrality, but we will allow time for some questions at the end of the presentation. But before I begin the actual presentation, I would like to say that last year, BONA celebrated its 100-year anniversary. So the company really has a very good heritage and history when it comes to the treatment of wood floors. And the other thing is, 10 years ago, BONA developed a program called the BONA Certified Craftsman. And the goal of this program really was to elevate the industry. And we've been able to identify the best of the best in every marketplace so that you can have confidence in the fact that your projects will be done correctly. I would say throughout North America, there's probably 60 to 70,000 people who install or sand and finish wood floors. And in 10 years, we've only certified 1% of those folks. So my goal has really been to connect the A&D community with the BONA Certified Craftsman in every marketplace in North America. So with that, I'll get into the presentation. And once again, thank you for being here today. So the average person who does a PowerPoint presentation speaks 135 words a minute. Most of you can read 300 words a minute, especially with the computer monitor right in front of you. And I speak 97 words a minute. And there is a reason. I am from Boston. And if I do not enunciate every word, the most hideous accent on the planet will manifest itself, and I am really trying to save you from that. I also tell you that to let you know that I am not going to read this presentation to you. You have all probably sat through way too many of those, and I want you to be confident that that is not going to happen today. But what I am going to do is highlight specific things from each slide and talk about that a little bit more in depth. And on this slide, when it comes to the learning objectives that you've already read, I would have you pay attention to that bottom one, the way to evaluate bids better. In every market that I go into, whether it was live in person or whether it's virtual, I encounter people who do the work at this level. And unfortunately, I encounter way too many people that do work at a level that I cannot reach from a standing or a sitting position. So the question becomes, what do you get when you go with these folks, and what do you not get when you go to the bottom? And so as we go through this, you'll see really what's involved in making a wood floor turn out successfully for both yourself and your clients, and you'll be able to understand the entire process. So one of the things that has always appealed to me about the wood flooring industry is I love the sustainable message, the fact that we can renovate floors regularly and rejuvenate them as well. And I'll give you an example of this. I did a project in Cambridge, Massachusetts a number of years ago, and I had to replace a section of the flooring. Well, underneath the flooring was the newspaper from the day that floor was installed. And it was Valentine's Day, 1932. And as I'm looking through this time capsule of history, it was very cool. All of a sudden, I came across an advertisement for the very floor that I was replacing. And the price on it was 3 cents a board foot. Now, granted, the material I was replacing it with was more than 3 cents a foot. But by the time I wove in that repair, used dye and coating techniques, that floor from 1932 easily had another 30, 40, 50 years of life expectancy to it. I mentioned at the start of the presentation, I'm from Boston. I actually fibbed on that a little bit. I'm south of Boston by about 40 miles. I live in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And this year, Plymouth is celebrating its 400-year anniversary of the Mayflower arriving with the Pilgrims. And so it's not unusual here in Plymouth to find floors that are not only over 100 years old, but well over 200 years. So I just always love that sustainable message. I was reading a report recently that last year, I think 14 billion pounds of metal-treated vinyls were produced. That's approximately 250 square miles. It's enough to cover the entire city of Chicago. So I feel anytime that we can restore wood floors versus replacing them, it's a good thing. And actually, recently, a report came out by the IVL Swedish Technology Institute, and they make the statement there that when we restore an existing wood floor, that there is a 78% reduction in carbon footprint, and when we restore a resilient floor, there is a 92%. So once again, I think this is a very, very positive message. The other thing I will say is that wood floors are very, very easy to clean and maintain. They don't trap allergens, and they really have a good impact on indoor air quality. Interesting, the last time I did this presentation in person was in San Diego, and when this slide came up, one of the attendees, she spilled her glass of wine, and so the host just came over with a microfiber cloth, wiped up the spill. One of the architects who attended that presentation actually accused me of staging that event, and I told him I wasn't that quick or clever, but it really did underscore the fact that wood floors are very, very easy to maintain. When it comes to the types of floors that are out there, let's talk about engineered floors. Years ago, our industry used to call these floors laminated wood floors. And then another industry came along, took photographs of wood and wood grains, and then they put a layer of melamine plastic over it, and they called that laminate. So at that point, our industry changed the name to engineered because it really better reflected that overall banded construction. Engineered floors are very good for environments that are subject to wide swings of relative humidity. They're stable. The only disadvantage can be that there may not be enough wear layer, or what's referred to as lamella, on top to be able to treat that floor down the road. Now keep in mind, when I make that statement, I am not talking about floor products that are available at professional distribution and professional flooring stores. I am primarily talking about the box stores, because for them to sell at that price point, they have to maximize yield. And what that translates into is shorter pieces, narrower widths, and thinner wear layers of lamella. I serve as an inspector with the National Wood Flooring Association, and so I get calls from people from time to time. Well, I got a call from a fellow one day. He went in to sand a wood floor, and keep in mind these machines weigh anywhere from 200, 270 pounds. They spin at 1,700 RPMs. Well, anyways, he takes his first pass with this big machine, the floor turns white. What happened? So he calls me in a panic. And so I listened, and I thought about it for a minute. And by the way, when I say I thought about it for a minute, I only thought about it for 3 seconds, but then I just paused for effect. And at that point, I congratulated him on sanding his first vinyl floor. In other words, it might have had some wood grain to it. It might have looked woodish or woody. It was not. And the reason why I congratulated him on sanding his first vinyl floor is my confidence level was high. He was going to do it again at some point in his career. But that story, which by the way is true, does underscore the fact that with some of these products, we may not be able to treat them down the road. When it comes to solid wood floors in the North American market, they're 3/4 of an inch thick, and you have 5/16 of an inch above that tongue and groove engagement. Well, since the average floor sanding only removes a 32nd of an inch, you can see that a solid wood floor can be sanded anywhere from 6, 8, potentially 9 times with the right technician doing the work. And that's why it's not surprising that there's so many floors well over 100 years, because of the fact that we are able to sand them and recoat them multiple times. Another good environmental source for use of wood is in end grain flooring. End grain flooring basically takes smaller diameter trees and allows us to kind of spline them together and install a larger floor area. So it's a good usage of smaller trees. If you specify end grain, just make sure that the professional who's going to either install or sand and finish just notices or knows the differences between end grain and other types of wood floors. Most wood floors expand from side to side. End grain are really under forces of tensile, that up and down movement. And so it can pose challenges during the installation, also in the sanding and finishing. And then primarily what we are talking about today is site finish. So an unfinished wood floor is installed, and then it is sanded and stained, coated, and whatever. There's a lot of advantages to unfinished wood. You are generally going to get longer lengths. You're going to get wider boards. You're not going to have any bevels or micro bevels that allow for substrate variations. You're going to get a flat floor. The only disadvantage really to unfinished is if the wrong sand and finish process is used. When it comes to the types of woods that are being used in North America, this is an example of the main popular ones. If you look at the photograph on the left-hand side, you'll see what these species look like when they're coated with a waterborne finish. And the lower right-hand side shows what it looks like when it is coated with an oil-based polyurethane. And later in the presentation, I'll get a little bit more into the differences between oil and water. When it comes to what's being installed out there, keep in mind that this slide here, I believe, is about 3 years old. And I can tell you right now, there's a white oak is probably closer to 40% of the market. I have talked with professionals in certain pockets of North America who tell me they're doing 80–90% white oak. So we can see that white oak is definitely becoming a dominant player. It was interesting. I was at a architectural conference a couple of years ago. It was called the BONA custom event, and they kind of describe it as speed dating with architects. So I had 23 half-hour one-on-one meetings over the course of 2 days. But what was interesting about that conference is I must have heard the word timeless used on at least 6 occasions. And I kept thinking about that whole timelessness. And then it dawned on me. I've been able to walk on some of the castle floors over in Europe, Versailles, Fontainebleau, and they all have quarter-sawn white oak floors, and they convey that sense of timelessness. I'm not hearing people talk about natural anymore. I'm hearing them talk about neutrals. I'm hearing them talk about organics. And when you look at the color and the grain pattern of white oak, you can see why that particular product is being used in many applications. So I don't like calling anything a trend. I will just say that it is a development within our industry, and that will be taking place as time goes forward. So never before has home, health, and humanity been so important to us. And that is something that a wood floor does. It makes for a home. It's funny, I hear people talk about wood like it is a living and breathing material. And quite frankly, it is not. It is dead. But what's interesting is it behaves like a living, breathing thing. You know, it expands and contracts, it shrinks and swells. It has a touch, feel, smell, texture that makes it feel like it's alive. And you can see why it creates this environment in a home. But what we're also seeing is that it's being used more commercially. I think many of the challenges that many of you specifiers facing on the call, is you're trying to create that feeling of being grounded, even in a commercial space. And certainly wood makes for that, not only on the floor as an accent floor, but even as an accent wall. It's interesting, I actually started noticing more wood being used on walls in the Toronto market probably about 8 years ago, and I'm just seeing it become more and more widely used. And so once again, wood has the ability to create that grounded feeling that people are looking for. You know, it's interesting, years ago, I remember reading wood flooring manufacturers' installation instructions. And when it came to the subject of acclimation, it was purely bring the wood in the home, let it sit for 2 weeks, let it acclimate, and then install it. And I remember thinking to myself, why would I bring wood flooring, especially where I live, why would I bring it in the middle of August, let it sit for 2 weeks, pick up moisture, then install it, and then have the heating season start within a couple of weeks and shrink that floor out? Well, fortunately, the fellow who trained me, really tutored me in the industry, used to drill into my head over and over again. He said, Dave, acclimation is not a time thing. Acclimation is a moisture thing. And so once we understand that, we can understand that with some wood, depending on its moisture content, may need to sit for several days or several weeks before it's equilibrated with the environment that is going to be lived in, or the material might be able to be brought in that same day and installed because it is in balance with how that room or home is going to be lived in. So, and if you look at that photograph on the right, that does show the proper way to acclimate a wood floor. You can see that it's off the substrate. There's space between the bundles to allow the passage of air to move through it. And once again, get it conditioned to the space that it's going to be installed in. So if you are over concrete or gypcrete, you are definitely gluing that floor down. Years ago, because of adhesive technology was only in its, I guess, childhood phases, we were only able to glue down finger block parquets or 9x9 engineered blocks because the adhesives really didn't have the shear strength to accommodate for that natural movement of wood. Nowadays, you are able to glue down solid 9-inch wide products here in the North American marketplace. Another development that has taken place earlier this year, the National Wood Flooring Association revised their installation guidelines. And now they recommend what's referred to, if you're going over plywood or OSB, they're recommending a nail and glue assist. Anytime that you have a board 5 inches and wider, they are recommending a glue assist. And when you think about this, years ago when 2 1/4-inch strip floors were wildly popular, the average 4x8 sheet of plywood would have contained almost 130 nails fastening that floor to the plywood. Well, now what happens when we use a 6-inch wide board? We use 2/3 less fasteners when we really need to use more fasteners. And so that's why glue assist is becoming very, very popular and being specified on a regular basis. The two main types of adhesives on the marketplace are urethanes and silanes. Urethane adhesives have been around since the mid-90s, and they do very good at bonding a wood floor to the substrate. The only problem with urethanes is they contain isocyanates. The isocyanates gives the urethane adhesive its strength. But what happens is when you get it on the surface of a pre-finished board and you don't clean that spot up right away, it will eat or etch into the finish. And then you're no longer able to clean up that spot. That haze or blush will be there and you won't be able to get rid of it. Another thing I do with the National Wood Flooring Association is I read and I grade inspection reports. And I saw one 2.5 years ago. The inspector went out to look at a floor that he knew was going to be about 1,500 square feet. Well, he opens the door to the home and there's 1,200 pieces of blue tape all over that floor. Guess what? Identifying where every spot of adhesive was not able to be cleaned up. Now, the inspector, to his credit, said, well, you can hire a professional. You can hire a craftsman to come in. They'll abrade the surface, recoat it. And the homeowner was like, nope, we paid for a factory finished floor. That's what we're going to get. So the wood flooring contractor had to go in, rip that floor out, replace it out of his own pocket. And I know how painfully expensive that is. And as I'm reading this report, I'm thinking to myself, if only he had known about silane technology. While it is a newer technology, it's not new. It has been on the marketplace since 2004. Over in Europe, 90% of the floors being installed over there are installed with silane-based adhesives. And what's nice about it is generally they have greater shear strength than urethanes. And if you get it on the surface of a pre-finished floor, you can clean it within 72 hours. I have actually cleaned up silane spots a year after the fact, ones that I had intentionally left on a pre-finished board. Last year, I did a presentation in Chicago that was a little bit more in-depth on adhesives. But anyways, at the end of the presentation, one of the lead architects asked me, he said, Dave, with all the advantages of silanes versus urethanes, why would people continue to specify or use urethane adhesives? And I have to tell you, the question almost floored me because I didn't expect it, but I was quick on my feet that day. And my answer was, well, the same reason that some people still have landlines and rotary phones. And by the way, I did the research on that. Most of those people live in New Hampshire, and the second highest concentration lives in Vermont, if that tells you anything about this pocket of the world. So one of the reasons why when specifying wood floors, you want to specify a wood floor adhesive, think about it this way. If you're installing a table or a chair, you don't want those independent elements of wood moving. You want to use a very rigid adhesive. Well, when it comes to a wood floor, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of individual boards that are naturally moving. So you want to specify an adhesive that allows for that natural movement. That property is referred to as elongation. I call it wiggle room. If the room goes out of equilibrium, the adhesive allows the floor to move. And then when the room goes back to its normal equilibrium, the adhesive is able to pull it back into position. And then we always advocate and tell people check for moisture. Remember the chart of wood that I showed you earlier? Every single one of those species has what's referred to as a DCC, a dimensional change coefficient. And what that means is when we know the moisture content of the substrate, and when we know the moisture content of the wood, and we know the temperature of the room, and we know the relative humidity of the space, we can do the math. And we can figure out exactly what kind of dimensional change that floor is going to go through based on the seasons. I hate to tell you how many times I talk to someone or get a call from someone who's experiencing a problem, and one of the first questions I invariably ask is, well, what was the moisture content of the substrate of the wood? I don't know. I don't have a moisture meter. And the thing is when we don't have those calculations, how are we going to know what's going to happen in the future? So these are your two main tests on the marketplace, the calcium chloride and RH test. A good friend and colleague of mine summed it up this way. He said it called a calcium chloride test like getting an X-ray, but he called an RH test like getting an MRI. You just get a better visual of what's going to happen with that floor once it gets covered. Now, the sanding process is designed, if you look at that illustration on the bottom, what you're trying to do is create a very fine scratch pattern that cannot be seen from a standing position. And generally, residentially, you're looking for a coat of sealer, 2 coats of finish. Commercially, you're looking for 1 sealer and 3 coats of finish. In general, whether someone is using a waterborne finish or an oil-based finish, when they do 3 coats, you get the equivalent of 3 pieces of paper of protection, 3 mils of coating, or dry coating, that protect that floor from walking on it, using it, spilling, dog scampering, and so forth. There are some products out there that companies make that when you use 3 coats of their product, you actually get an additional mil of protection. You get 4 mils instead of 3. That's a lot more protection. And if you stay till the end of the presentation, I'll tell you what company makes that. So the picture on the left, prior to 1995, there was no dust containment equipment available to the wood flooring profession. And I remember my customers during that time period, many of them didn't want their floors sanded because they didn't want to have to deal with the dust. They didn't want to deal with the mess, or they would wait till they were going on vacation to have their floors done. Well, fortunately, right around 1995, dust containment equipment became available, and it made a huge impact on the quality of the finishes. Because now, instead of having, the airborne dust kind of trickle down into the fresh coating, we were able to eliminate that airborne dust. One of the reasons for dust containment and why it's so important, even more important than the quality of the coating, is that, remember we talked about earlier that almost 70% of what's being used in North America is either white oak or red oak. Oak dust is not only a sensitizer, it is a carcinogen. And we simply do not want the people doing the work, the clients, their families, their pets, being exposed to carcinogens. Because when someone comes into your home or project and all they have is bags on their machine, they are off the charts when it comes to OSHA's threshold for indoor dust exposure. When someone comes to your home with a dust containment system that's outfitted with HEPA filters, or an evacuation system that completely extracts the dust completely out of the room or home, you are well under OSHA's threshold. And by the way, remember how earlier we talked about evaluating bids better? Don't ever hesitate to have someone define to you what they mean by dust containment. I was at a project on the West Coast. I hear the project manager talking to the wood floor guy. I hear him ask, now you're going to use dust containment. And I hear the guy say, yep, yep, yep. And I rolled my eyes, but I was there for a completely different reason. So project manager leaves, wood floor guy walks over to me, and I asked him, I said, hey, what do you use for dust containment? He gave me one of the most pathetic looks I've ever seen and said, well, we closed the door. That was his idea of containment. They closed the door to the room, the home, the commercial space that they were working in. That is not dust containment. Make sure they define it. Obviously, when it comes to stain and color, you have a world available to you. And in addition to color, there are now textures that are easier to create than before. And I'll give you an example, wire brush. Wire brush used to be a very labor-intensive process. Now you have machines and equipment that is able to give that look very, very interesting look when you eliminate some of that soft part of the grain and that three-dimensional look that you get. But whether you use a stain or you use a wet seal that's going to dry as a dry film, both stains and sealers get in between the boards and they dry brittle, which allows for the natural movement of wood floors. The other thing that sealers do is that they minimize what I'm going to call tannin, extraction, resin pull, from wicking up and mingling with the finish. And I'll give you an example of how I got a good education on sealers. I remember one day being on a project. I finished vacuuming the floor. I wanted to get it coated, but I didn't have any waterborne sealer with me. But I had waterborne finish. And so I thought to myself, well, I pay more money for waterborne finish. Therefore, I'm giving my customer an even better job. I coated the floor, went home happy. One of the things that makes red wine very delicious is it sits in white oak barrels, sometimes for 6 months, sometimes for 5 years, and it extracts the tannins. Well, when you apply a waterborne finish to a white oak floor, it also extracts the tannins and turns the floor green. And since green was not in vogue at that time, that is a floor I resanded and got a very extensive education on the value of sealer coats. The other thing that's neat in the world of sealers is when waterborne finishes first came out, they were clear and colorless, and some people didn't like it. Now within sealers, you have sealers that have amber properties to them or Nordic properties. And I remember over the years sanding a wood floor, the people would look at the raw wood and ask me, is there any way you can just leave it like that? And the answer was no, because any coating I put on it was going to change color. Now you have sealers that when you apply it and it dries, it locks in that raw color. Very, very interesting development in our industry. And then your finish coats are all about your durability as well as your sheen. You know, for many years, all we had was satin, semi, gloss, 30, 60, 90-degree reflective. Now you have finishes on the marketplace that have sheen levels of between 5 and 7. It looks like there's no finish on the floor at all. Very, very unique look. And then obviously we've been seeing coming over from Europe, some of the different penetrating oils and hard wax oils. And probably the easiest way to describe the differences between the two is that a penetrating oil kind of bonds chemically with the structure of the cell, whereas a hard wax occupies the space of the cell, sits on top. So two different ways of protecting the surface. Keep in mind that these technologies are far superior to what used to be used years ago, the old stain and paste wax systems. But just keep in mind that these products do require a little bit more maintenance. So just understand how your client is going to inhabit or use their space, and you can make a good recommendation for what type of finish for them to use. Well, floor finish has definitely evolved over the years. I could tell you lots of interesting stories about finish that came from our little red bug friend there, but we don't have the time to do that today. But these are your three main classifications, and I'll start with the one in the middle, oil-based polyurethanes. While these coatings are labeled combustible, they are not flammable. They are used successfully day in and day out. But what many people are getting tired of is the high VOCs, the smells that are associated with using these products. And I've talked to wood flooring professionals. Not only are they tired of the smell, they're tired of the phone call from the homeowner saying, when is this smell going to go away? And that relates to cure, and I'll talk about that 2 or 3 slides from now. But anyways, what that is doing is it's driving people into the waterborne finishes because they're very low VOCs. The people can inhabit their home or the space that's being worked on. And so we're seeing more waterborne finish specified. The one class I'll throw under the bus is your class 1. These are solvents that have a flash point of under 100 degrees. Acid Cure is an example that has a flash point of 55, 60 degrees. What's worse is lacquer. Lacquer has been used extensively in the wood floor profession. And the reason why is because it dries so quickly. But keep in mind, when you hire someone who comes in, puts a coat of lacquer down, puts down a coat of fast dry poly, and then one coat of poly, you are probably only getting 2 mils of protection. And that floor is going to wear out prematurely, and you'll have to have that floor recoated or resanded much sooner than if other products were used. But the other problem with lacquer is it has a flash point of 12 degrees. That means it can be Christmas Day, Boston, or Vancouver. We can have doors and windows open, and all someone has to do is unplug an extension cord, and it will ignite those fumes. So since no one on today's call is interested in specifying destruction, we're just going to focus on the difference between oil and water. All wood ages, whether it's exposed to light, UV, temperature, even some of the chemical compositions within wood are responsible for changing that tone. An oil-based polyurethane definitely changes quicker and faster. Any look that you specify with a waterborne finish is going to retain that look for a much longer time than the oil-based products. And then I talked about the word cure. When I use the word cure, I'm talking about when we can put the area rugs back down. A good oil base takes 2 weeks to cure, 2 weeks before we can put the area rugs back down. A good water base will take 1 week to cure. A fantastic waterborne finish will cure in 72 hours, 3 days. And my associate, Brad Scott, who's on the call, will probably be happy to tell you what product that is. And then Tabor abrasion tests have shown that waterborne finishes are far more durable than their oil modified cousins. And by the way, as a manufacturer, this is probably the easiest test to manipulate. So if you look at the bottom part of your screen, you'll see that this was conducted by independent lab, third party, and that way you're able to be aware that you're getting accurate results. And the other thing that is interesting in finishes is that you now have finishes that have a coefficient of friction built into them that meet ADA recommendations for assisted living or ramps. Years ago, to achieve that, we had to add silica, we had to add sand to the coating in order to get that COF. That is no longer the case. So this is also a very good development within the flooring industry. So you have the opportunity to specify compatibility versus incompatibility. And now I'll just spend the last few minutes on talking about floor care. This seems to be the most unspecified aspect of wood floors. I continue to see on a regular basis people using spaghetti mops. You know, they're swabbing the deck of the USS Popeye using way too much water for their floors. Or they're using these steam mops that inject moisture but don't pull the moisture out. And so that can cause a wood floor to cup over a period of time. There's a lot of cleaning products that are available at the box stores that say that they're designed for wood. And unfortunately, when you use them, you understand too soon that they're really not intended for wood floors. If you look at the left-hand side of the slide at the very bottom, I just want to delineate some of these terms only because they're being used a little interchangeably and just want to kind of define them. When we clean something, we remove the germs, but we do not kill them. Disinfecting and antibacterial mean the same thing. So in order to disinfect or antibac, we must clean first, then use the disinfectant, antibac, for however long that manufacturer says to leave it on the surface, whether it's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then wipe it off. That is a surface that has truly been disinfected or antibac. And then keep in mind when it comes to antimicrobial, when a coating is antimicrobial, it protects what is underneath the coating. It does not protect what is walking on the coating or what is touching the coating or what is crawling on the coating. And so that just gives you a little bit of hopefully clearer definitions of some of these terms. So here's the process. Dust mop, vacuum sweep on a regular basis, use a pH neutral cleaner to clean the floor. And then you also have the opportunity to have the floor professionally cleaned. If you look at that photograph in the middle bottom, you can see how visibly cleaner that floor is, because this machine is able to inject cleaning solution into the floor, and then it has strong enough vacuums where it is able to completely pick up all the water or moisture that is being used to clean that floor. So not only is the floor clean, it is also visibly brighter. The other thing I will share is, a lot of people use vinegar in water or recommend vinegar in water, and that sounds like a very homey way to take care of a wood floor. But keep in mind, the vinegar attacks the lignin. The lignin is like that thread that holds the cell structure together. And what happens now in the soft part of the grain, or what we call the early wood, now it can be susceptible to pitting, indentation, and discoloration. If you've cleaned your floors a couple of times with vinegar and water, you've not destroyed it, but over the long term, you could have those results. And then keep in mind that you always have the ability to recoat a wood floor. If you've got some minor scratches, some wear patterns, or maybe the last time you coated your floors or had them professionally done, you went glossy, now you've matured a little bit, you'd like maybe satin or extra matte, you can hire a craftsman to come in and recoat that floor. Well, according to the EPA, we are spending way too much time indoors. And this statistic of 90% was before any of this happened. And since many of us have to spend so much time indoors, I think it's always important to look for third-party certification when it comes to the products that we specify or we use for our families. I know that many of you on the call are specifiers, but we're all consumers, and we really all want the best for our families. And third-party certification can definitely help us achieve that. You know, I've been in this industry for quite a while, and I've seen products that one day had like skulls and crossbones on it, and then the next day it had kittens and unicorns. And yes, I am stretching the boundaries of credulity with that one. But just because we slap a fig leaf on a product does not make it environmentally friendly. There's too much greenwashing that goes on in the marketplace. But keep in mind, when you specify unfinished wood flooring and you specify low VOC adhesives and low VOC varnishes and finishes, you contribute to the total LEED points that are available, for your platinum, gold, silver certifications and so forth. In fact, remember years ago when you bought a new car, you open the door, new car smell, that was all VOCs. That was the carpet off-gassing. It was the bucket seats off-gassing. It was the dashboard off-gassing. And now to get that smell, you have to go to the auto parts store and you buy the new car scent tree, which I call the VOC tree, because that's really the smell that it is trying to duplicate. This is our last slide. So in conclusion, you have the opportunity to specify a complete system. Please demand dust containment. You all know the reason why. Insist on waterborne finishes. Interesting. Waterborne first came out in 1979. I started my business in 1985, and I am a late adapter when it comes to all technology, but I was an early adapter of waterborne because I saw the value in it, not only for my clients, but I also had my two sons working with me, and I did not want them breathing these high VOC products. By doing all of this, you have the opportunity to contribute towards a very happy and healthy space for yourselves, for your friends, and for your clients. So that is the official presentation, and if there were any questions, I'll have Tom feed them to me, and we'll take it from there.
Hello, David. Excellent presentation. I'm just moderating the chat here, and I do not see any questions as of yet. So
generally, there's no questions after I present because I've thoroughly explained everything that questions are impossible.
nicely put. Yeah, we still have a few minutes here, so
Sure.
if anyone wants to type something in chat or...
Hey, Brad, are you still on call? You want to show yourself?
Yes, thank you, Dave. Great as always. I always enjoy the presentation. Gets better every time.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
So, yeah, so I'm Brad Scott. I'm the local territory manager here in Western Canada for BONA. So I look after BC and Alberta, if you're specifying in any of those areas, and I'll type my contact info into the chat. So if you're looking for certified craftsmen or contractors in your area to do work, I can definitely make those connections happen.
The other thing is, for those of you who attended, if you feel that some of your colleagues or teammates would benefit from this presentation, we'd be more than happy to schedule one for your specific firm and even include a nice Tim Horton gift card for arranging it to happen. So I'll let Brad work on that as well. But Brad, are there any specific products that you wanted to talk about that I touched on in the presentation, like the three-day cure product?
Yeah, so through BONA, we manufacture a product called Traffic HD, which was what David referred to earlier in the presentation. So that is the only water-based finish on the market that will cure out fully in 3 days. This is really, it's a game changer for homeowners, for contractors, because they can get back into their space quicker, faster, and that product is also Green Guard Gold certified.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And you know, when I talked about third-party certification earlier this year, BONA achieved Green Guard Gold certification for their line of silane-based adhesives. And this is really important because other than walls, floors really are the largest amount of surface area that inhabits any project. And having that zero VOC Green Guard Gold will definitely help when it comes to accumulating points for your LEED classifications or certifications. And then Brad, what about the sealers that we talked about that provide the different tones? Do you want to mention that or go into a little bit more depth on that?
Sorry, the sealers?
Yes.
Yeah, so within the BONA lineup, we have
I think Brad froze there, Dave.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost him completely. Oh, well.
Well, Brad was going to talk about that within the BONA line of sealers, there is BONA Amber Seal that duplicates the look of an oil floor. There's also BONA Natural Seal that leaves that floor looking that raw color. And BONA Nordic Seal that gives you that, one coat gives you maybe that light pickled look, whereas 2 coats look like the floor has almost been white stained. So definitely unique characteristics and qualities of products. Once again, one of the things I liked about this presentation is I've been using BONA products, 20 years before I ever started working for the company. And so I've used them extensively. I've paid for them over the years. And so I appreciate being able to share with everyone who attended today the information. So Tom, if there's no questions in the chat, we can end here.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, David. I hope
Thank you.
hope the rest of your day goes well.
Appreciate it.